The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Men in black are government agents dressed in black suits who question, interrogate, harass, threaten, allegedly memory wipe, or sometimes even assassinate unidentified flying object witnesses to keep them silent about what they have seen. The term is also frequently used to describe mysterious men working for unknown organizations, as well as various branches of government allegedly tasked with protecting secrets or performing other strange activities. The Men in Black, this week in Dark Places. The Men in Black excited a great deal of attention when they began to threaten UFO witnesses in the 1950s. But the powerful symbol of the sinister black-clad figure is centuries old, as Hillary Evans explains. Thanks, Hillary. UFO perceptionists and investigators are by no means the only people to receive visits from the Men in Black. Researchers Kevin and Sue McClure, investigating the North Wales religious revival of 1905, found accounts that bear a strong similarity to the current Men in Black phenomenon. In the neighborhood dwells an exceptionally intelligent young woman of the peasant class, whose bedroom has been visited 3 nights in succession at midnight by a man dressed in black. This figure has delivered a message to the girl which, however, she is forbidden to relate. The young woman in question, farmer's wife turned preacher Mary Jones, one of the leading figures of the revival, was well known for the mysterious lights that appeared as she pursued her mission. On one occasion, she encountered her sinister visitor at night. Mary was rescued by one of the lights, which darted a white ray at the apparition. The man in black promptly vanished. It all sounds like the wildest fantasy, except that there is substantial evidence for some of the phenomena reported, many of which were seen by several independent witnesses, some of them avowedly skeptical. Does this mean the Men in Black really existed? Really appeared in the bedroom of that intelligent young woman? What we are learning about the current wave of the Men in Black may help us to understand similar cases reported in earlier periods. Men in Black turn up in one form or another in the folklore of every country, and periodically they emerge from legend into everyday life. On June 2nd, 1603, a young country lad confessed before a court in southwest France to several acts of werewolfery, culminating in kidnapping and eating a child. He stated that he was acting under the orders of the Lord of the Forest, to whom he was bond slave. The Lord of the Forest he described as a tall dark man dressed in all black and riding a black horse. Montague Summers, who reports the case in his book The Werewolf, 1933, has no hesitation in identifying this and all other Men in Black with the devil of Christian teaching, and this continues to be a widespread interpretation. Even today, there are theorists who claim that UFOs are diabolical in origin, and the Men in Black, consequently, must be Satan's agents. In the parts of the world, religious doctrine presupposes 2 warring factions of good and evil. Good is equated with light and evil with darkness. The agents of good tend to be blonde and dressed in white, while the agents of evil have dark hair and are dressed in black. Other connotations follow naturally. Under cover of darkness, all kinds of tricks can be carried out, and crimes committed. Darkness is also associated with winter, and so with death. In almost all parts of the world, death rites and customs are associated with the color black. So whatever his specific role, the Man in Black is distinctly a sinister figure. He is a trickster, not working openly. He stands for lies rather than truth, death rather than life. Because of the obviously symbolic elements involved, many theorists speculate that the Men in Black are not flesh and blood creatures at all, but mental constructs projected from the imagination of the percipient and taking on the form that blends traditional legend with contemporary imagery. But it can't be quite that simple. Too many of the accounts show evidence of relating to physical creatures moving in the real physical world. To those who report Men in Black encounters, there are several possible origins. At the most concrete, the Men in Black is supposed to be the representative of an official department, sometimes as straightforward and above board as the Air Force, sometimes a more covert organization such as the CIA or FBI. The average American, in particular, seems far from convinced that investigative bodies such as the CIA are necessarily working in the public interest. And the same attitude of mind has evolved the conspiracy theories about UFOs. That gigantic cover-up is being mounted by the government suggests that the Men in Black are part of the operation, their sole object being to conceal the facts by silencing witnesses and purloining photographs and other evidence. The fact that the identities of a great many Men in Black have been checked, and they have invariably been found not to be the persons they purport to be, lends strength to this suspicion, which can amount to virtual paranoia. Thus, in 1970, an American theorist, Tony Kimmery, wrote in all seriousness, "The mysterious Men in Black and the entire collection of their thugs, henchmen, and highly trained intelligence officers are a big part of the complex UFO phenomena, which is in turn part of another big and complex phenomena. It is known that projects by them are now underway for the complete control of political, financial, religious, and scientific institutions. They, the Men in Black, have a very long background and history that stretches back for centuries, including a massive buildup of concentration where it is today. Men in Black often reported as having either defective command of English or conversely an over-precise, over-meticulous way of speaking that suggests that they are not speaking a tongue natural to them. Mary Heyer, a West Virginia journalist, noted that a strange visitor picked up a ballpoint pen from her desk and examined it with amazement, as if he had never seen anything like it before. And UFO percipient Mrs. Ralph Butler, who received a visit from a man who claimed to be an Air Force major, was astonished to find that he was so unfamiliar with American food that he had to be shown how to eat it. The implication is that they are foreigners, an attitude encouraged by American xenophobia. Curiously, though, no witness appears to have suggested that the Men in Black are of Russian origin. Where specific details are mentioned, it is always implied that they are vaguely Oriental. Slanting eyes are frequently reported. The deadpan faces suggest the inscrutable Asiatic. Sometimes heads are totally bald. By linking the yellow pearl with the Men in Black, of course, it is possible to frighten oneself with two boogeymen for the price of one. Although witnesses rarely state openly that they believe their visitors to come from beyond Earth, this is often clearly implied. Bender's three men were clearly of alien origin. Other Men in Black have displayed behavior traits that seem to suggest that they are able to function only for a limited time span. After a while, they insist that they have to leave or take pills or ask for water. And sometimes they show signs of losing strength. A further possibility remains that the Men in Black are neither flesh and blood, even extraterrestrial flesh and blood. On the one hand, not pure hallucination, illusion on the other, but something in between. The entities encountered in a French case seems to have existed, if existed is the word, on some alternative plane of being. The alleged abduction in December of 1979 of Frank Fontaine for 7 days on board a UFO was one of the rare French cases to have attracted worldwide attention. The abduction itself was, of course, the central event of the case, but it was only the start of a series of incidents. One of these, involving Men in Black, concerned another member of the trio, Jean-Pierre Provost, who told this story. The night of Friday the 7th to Saturday the 8th of December 1979, Frank, Solomon, and I had sat up talking for a long time and went to bed sometime around 5 to 5:30 in the morning. At 7 there was a ring at the door. Solomon and Frank didn't hear it, so I went to open the door. I found myself in the presence of 3 fellows. One was of average height, very well dressed, in dark green, almost black tie, white shirt, and waistcoat to match his suit. He had a fringe of a beard, black like his hair, and a mustache. His general appearance was pretty good. The others were bigger than him, taller, and more heavily built. What follows I haven't told the police. I reported the visit itself to them because we've already had enough of being taken for crackpots. But these 2 types, with the bearded man, didn't really exist, and I'm certain of it. In the first place, they had no sight. That's hard to explain. They fixed me with their eyes, but those eyes were nothing but a white mass all over. They were terrifying. The bearded fellow asked me, "Are you one of the 3?" By which, obviously, he meant, was I one of the 3 people concerned in the Sergi Pontoise case? I said yes, and he went on, "Good. In that case, you can pass the word to your companions. You've already said too much. An accident will happen to you, and if you say any more, it will be more serious than that." And with that, they vanished. But how? There's something I can't begin to explain. They didn't take the lift. I'd have heard it if they did. And even more, if they had used stairs, the door makes a deafening row. I went to the window that overlooks the parking lot. I can tell you definitely that all night, at least until 5 a.m. or later, we'd noticed a Ford Capri in metallic green standing beneath our window. A Ford that we didn't recognize. Well, when I looked down, there was this Ford, just starting up. How they managed to get to it without using the stairs or lift, complete mystery. I woke up Frank and Solomon, and we went to the police, without giving them the unbelievable details about the 2 toughs. The police said, so long as they didn't actually attack or wound you, there's nothing we can do. So get back home. And that was that. Kind of a long-winded fellow, isn't he? And I read about that Sergi Pontoise case way back on episode 99. Go check it out. It's a pretty interesting story. Jean-Pierre told investigators that he had seen the 3 men on several subsequent occasions. Generally, it was simply a matter of seeing them across the street or at a market. But on one occasion, he received another warning while they were in a tobacco store buying cigarettes, telling him to keep quiet about their experiences and making threats. Subsequently, under hypnosis, Jean-Pierre indicated that the entities were not extraterrestrials but intraterrestrials, forces of evil from inside the earth. He also added, intriguingly, that the bearded man had been real, but that his 2 henchmen had been unreal. Cases such as this are made baffling by their inconsequentiality. Big word. But one thing seems certain. Just as the Men in Black visits seem to originate from some psychic or mental link between the Men in Black and the witness, so the consequences of the visit depend less on the Men in Black than on the attitude adopted by the witness. If he takes the Men in Black at their face value, if he believes their threats, he's liable to find himself heading for a breakdown. Paranoia may develop, and he may believe himself followed everywhere, harassed by paranormal happenings, such as strange telephone calls and poltergeist phenomena. It is even possible that these second-stage phenomena are genuine, as far as the victim himself is concerned. They are manifestations of his fears, but nonetheless real for that, and will not disappear until he capitulates and gives up his UFO studies, if he is an investigator, or keeps quiet about his experiences if he is a witness. If, on the other hand, he braves the matter out, if he refuses to abandon his investigation, continues to tell the world of his experiences, it seems that the men in black are powerless against him. Carlos de los Santos, stopped on his way to a television interview by a gang of tough, threatening characters, was momentarily scared. He turned his car around, went home, and canceled the interview. But a friend reassured him and persuaded him not to let himself be intimidated. A fortnight later, he gave the interview, and there wasn't a squeak from the men in black. The men in black phenomena is clearly worth studying carefully, whatever the nature of the men in black, whether they are wholly illusionary, or whether there is a measure of reality in them. They exert a great deal of power over the minds of their victims. The better we understand them, the more we may learn about how such power can be deployed. And, if for no other reason, the Men in Black phenomenon is important because it gives the sociologist a chance to study a legend in the making. The sinister Men in Black masquerade provides us with contemporary phenomena that rank with the witch, the vampire, and the werewolf of times past. The Man Who Shot a Humanoid. One inclement evening in November 1961, Paul Miller and 3 companions were returning home to Minot, North Dakota after a hunting trip. What they could only describe as a luminous silo landed in a nearby field. At first they thought it was a plane crashing, but had to revise their opinion when the plane abruptly vanished. But as the hunters drove off, the object reappeared and 2 humanoids emerged from it. Miller panicked and fired at one of the creatures, apparently wounding it. The other hunters fled. On their way back to Minot, all of them experienced a blackout and lost 3 hours. Terrified, they decided not to report the incident to anyone. Yet the next morning, when Miller reported to work in an Air Force office, 3 men in black arrived. They said they were government officials, but showed no credentials, and remarked unpleasantly that they hoped Miller was telling the truth about the UFO. How did they know about it? We have a report, they said vaguely. They seem to know everything about me, where I worked, my name, everything else, Miller said. They asked questions about his experience as if they already knew the answers. Yet oddly they said nothing about the wounding of the humanoid. They seemed instead to be fascinated by the clothes Miller had worn when he saw the UFO, even going to his house to inspect them. They left such a lasting impression of menace that Miller did not dare tell his story for several years. Weird voices over the telephone, bizarre written messages, tales of crashed flying saucers, threats and warnings. A respected UFO study group was plagued by all these for several months. Martin Ship tells how it set out to bring the alien down to Earth. Thanks, Martin. Men in Black had their heyday in the 1950s and 60s. They were the mysterious visitors clad in black and of a darkish complexion, who were said to have visited many prominent ufologists and made vague threats against them. They were said to have had some success. Some ufologists were reputed to have been silenced. In those days, most ufologists believed UFOs to be flying saucers, spacecraft piloted by extraterrestrials. Visits by men in black and threatening telephone calls and letters were due either to the aliens or to the government agents trying to stifle the investigators' research. None of this was proved, but it fit in neatly with the spaceship theory. The ufologist of today is on the whole a cooler and more objective investigator. He is open to a much wider range of possibilities as to the source of UFOs. Alien spaceships and Men in Black are out of favor and largely forgotten. So when a case reminiscent of Men in Black was thrust onto a serious UFO group in 1980, The past seemed to be returning. The group in question was the Sweden Center for UFO Research and Investigation in Western England. Its members are recruited by invitation only. There are only 6. Mysterious messages disrupted their research for 4 months. During this period, over 30 messages sent by post and over the telephone were received. They threatened the investigators' welfare if they did not stop their investigation. The first of them came on Monday, August 18, 1980. On that day, one member, Charles Affleck, found on his doorstep a small, shriveled-up plastic bag, which appeared to have been damaged by heat. Inside, he found a piece of paper addressed to them. The message simply said, "Case UFO study. Do not meddle or else." The message was followed by a jumble of squiggles resembling Arabic script. Affleck was astonished and immediately called for an emergency meeting of the group. That evening the message was discussed and the group members jokingly blamed the other for it. They regarded the whole episode as something of a joke. As little more could be done, the matter was dropped. To everyone's surprise, a second message was received 2 days later, this time through the post. It read, "Beware, we are watching you all. Do not interfere, we will meet." The group was still of the opinion that this was all some kind of joke, and that the joker would soon reveal himself. The following week, 3 telephone calls were received by 2 members in their respective homes. The messages consisted of 3 bleeps, followed by a jumble of weird electronic noises, and finally 3 further bleeps that lasted from 15 to 20 seconds. A third letter arrived on September 3rd and read, "It seems that you intend to continue to interfere. We must meet at designated place. 2 representatives to be chosen. Wire protection tape. Reply. Place tape. Exact map. Reference 172 by 5816. The location was visited next day. It turned out to be a field just outside of Sweden. The group had decided not to record a message on tape, but to leave a written one. It wished to keep some control of the situation by declining to obey the instructions exactly. In the meantime, Charles Affleck had set up a cassette recorder in his home so that when the next telephone call came, this time at midnight, it was recorded. The message consisted of the same weird noises that had been heard before. The next day, Affleck and the present author listened to the recording over and over again, trying to make some sense of it. First, it sounded like electronic gibberish, and then, to their surprise, they heard what sounded like words. Listening very carefully, trying to ignore the other noises, they could pick out further words. The voice was eerie, almost frightening. It sounded non-human, mechanical. Eventually, they made out the following message. "You are primitive. We are here to watch you. We will judge what we want. You are too close." Naturally, the investigators were taken aback by this. Sensing the issue might get out of hand, they approached the local police and told them what was happening. The police were not interested and did no more than record the complaint. The next message worried the investigators further. It said, "Do not go to authorities again or else." How the sender knew the police had been contacted was a mystery. However, as the police were not going to help, the investigators decided to solve this matter themselves. They hoped they would get some answer to the letter they had left that might lead to something. The cassette had disappeared from the location, despite the group's efforts to watch it whenever possible. The investigators like to think of themselves as very level-headed people, but these messages were beginning to scare them, since they had no idea who could be behind them. The group's normal activities virtually came to a standstill. Several days after the cassette case was taken from the field, a letter was received by Charles Affleck, again through the post. It was the paper that had been left in the cassette case, bearing their message along with the curt reply, "We will contact you." Soon another letter arrived. Its tone was far stronger. Here is an extract. "You think we are cranks. We will change our minds. Things will happen. This is a warning. We are here for a purpose. You are asking questions about things you know nothing of. You will cease UFO study. We have stopped others. We will stop you." And to the complete amazement of the group, the message ended by listing the members' surnames. It now seemed as though one of the group was leaking information. However, this idea was dismissed on the grounds that all the members knew each other so well. On September 15th, 3 further phone calls were reported by Charles Affleck and members Jen Watogowitz and Raymond Smithers. Affleck's call was made by the same horrible voice, but this time it seemed to be much angrier, telling the investigators to stop their investigations. Jan's call consisted simply of weird electronic noises. The story Raymond Smithers had to tell, though, was more interesting. He had been able to make out a map reference, which turned out to be a small track 1 mile east of Avebury. The spot was investigated by the members of the group. On the ground, they found the cassette tape that had been left at the first location. It contained a blank piece of paper, which, after various experiments, proved to carry a message, written in ink only visible under ultraviolet light. The message said that they would be willing to cooperate with the group and would send details on a meeting place. 2 days later, a map reference was given in a telephone call, and a week after that, a letter arrived with a message consisting of one word: Halloween. There were also further telephone calls consisting of apparently meaningless messages and weird noises. On Halloween, several of the members visited the location, West Woods, which is a small, isolated wood. They stayed there for some time and had one harrowing experience when they saw a white shape cross their path and disappear. But nothing further happened. The group re-examined the messages, the times and dates of their arrival, and so on, in the hope that this might produce some clues. It was obvious that many of the group's activities were mentioned in the messages, and it became an inescapable possibility that one of the group might be in league with the mysterious caller. Smithers was the only group member who had not been present when the telephone calls were received. He claimed to have received the calls himself, but no one else had been present on these locations. He was also interested in electronic gadgets. It seemed incredible that he could be responsible, for he appeared to be as mystified as anyone else by the messages. But he was now felt to be worth watching. Smithers then made a series of bizarre claims that strengthened the other group members' suspicions. First, he had presented a picture of a crashed UFO. It showed a spherical object that, he claimed, he came across while walking his dog close to his home. He had just had time to rush indoors and grab his Polaroid camera and use the last picture to snap the object before it rose into the air. Later investigation showed that the object was actually part of a sewage system. On another occasion, Smithers said that he had been stopped by the men in black on his way to a meeting. The man had touched his arm and caused the cassette tape he was carrying to melt. Later, a rash appeared on that same arm. The group now set about trapping the culprit. Affleck built an ingenious device that would photograph the hoaxer. A cassette case was to be left at the location, placed on a microswitch connected to a camera and a flash unit. The camera, an Olympus OMI, was sealed inside a steel box, to the front of which a shutter device was fitted. The box was fitted on a pole, at the other end of which was a block of cement. The pole was buried in the ground, with the camera and flash unit pointing to the spot at which the cassette case was placed. So he built a primitive trail cam. Pretty neat. When the case was picked up, the microswitch would be operated and the camera flash would go off, thus taking a picture of whoever picked up the case. Then the shutter would close in such a way that it would be impossible to reopen. The trap was set in yet another remote location. The investigators made sure that Smithers knew where they had left the cassette case. The device was tested several times and the ufologists left. It did work, and the resulting photograph clearly showed Smithers picking up the cassette case. When the members revisited the location, they found that the steel box, the pole, and the attached block of concrete had been wrenched from the ground and dragged a short distance. The flash had instantly given away the presence of the camera, of course, and in his fury, Smithers had found strength enough to perform the remarkable feat of uprooting the whole device, but he could not batter his way into the box or drag the whole structure away. Smithers was required to resign from the group. He claimed that he had perpetrated the hoax because he was himself being harassed. Unless he caused the group to fold, harm would come to him. However, he produced no proof of this claim. What is particularly surprising about Smithers' guilt is that he was a special constable in the police force and was training to be a state-registered nurse. In most people's eyes, these distinctions would presumably have proved him a very responsible citizen. Incidentally, the name Raymond Smithers is a pseudonym. The Sweden Center for UFO Research and Investigation now has a unique record on an MIB-style case. Unusually, this one was solved. The affair proves that with determination and initiative, one can get answers to a mystifying phenomenon. Wasn't quite the ending I was hoping for. A bit of a letdown.
But it was based in fact, because Men in Black would do stuff like that all the time to John Keel and other people. They'd leave messages pretending to be their secretary and just crazy stuff. They're little pranksters.
As UFO sightings increase, so allegedly does the harassment of witnesses by the sinister Men in Black. Hilary Evans begins his description of these frightening and bizarre encounters. Thanks, Hilary. I went into the fantastic and came up with the answer, declared Albert Bender, director of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, an amateur UFO organization based in Connecticut, USA. I know what the saucers are. Unfortunately, the rest of the world is still none the wiser, for Bender was prevented from passing on his discovery to the world by 3 sinister visitors. 3 men dressed in black, known as the Silencers. It had been Bender's intention to publish his momentous findings in his own journal, Space Review, but before committing himself finally, he felt that he ought to try his ideas out on a colleague. He mailed his report, and a few days later, the men came. Bender was lying in his bedroom, having been overtaken by a spell of dizziness, when he noticed 3 shadowy figures in the room. The figures became clearer. One of them were dressed in black clothes. They looked like clergymen, but wore hats similar to Homburg style. The faces were not clearly discernible, but the hats partly hid and shaded them. Feelings of fear left me. The eyes of all 3 figures suddenly lit up like flashbulbs, and all these were focused upon me. They seemed to burn into my very soul, as the pains above my eyes became almost unbearable. It was then that I sensed they were conveying a message to me by telepathy. His visitors confirmed that Bender was right in his speculations as to the true nature of UFOs. One of them was carrying Bender's report and provided additional information. This so terrified him that he was only too willing to go along with their demand, that he closed down his organization and ceased publication of his journal. He was instructed not to tell the truth to anyone on his honor as an American citizen. Did Bender expect anyone to believe his story? His friends and colleagues were baffled by it. One of them, Gray Barker, published a sensational book. They knew too much about flying saucers, and Bender himself supplied an even stranger account in his Flying Saucers and the 3 Men some years later, in response to persistent demands for an explanation from former colleagues. He told an extraordinary story involving extraterrestrial spaceships and bases in Antarctica It reads like the most far-fetched contactee dream stuff. It has been suggested that the implausibility of Bender's story is designated to throw serious investigators off the track. Believable or not, Bender's original account of the visit of the three strangers is of crucial interest to UFO investigators, for the story has been paralleled by many similar reports, frequently from people unlikely to have so much as heard as Bender and his experiences. UFO percipients and investigators are equally liable to be visited by men in black, and although the majority of the reports are from the United States, similar claims have come from Sweden and Italy, Britain and Mexico. And like the UFO phenomenon, the men in black span many decades and may have had precursors in earlier centuries. Like Bender's story, most of the later reports not only contain implausible details, but are also inherently illogical in virtually every case. There seems on the face of it more reason to disbelieve than to believe. But this does not eliminate the mystery. It simply requires us to study it in a different light. For whether or not these things actually happened, the fact remains that they were reported. And why should so many people, independently and often reluctantly, report these strange and sinister visitations? And why is it that these accounts are so similar, echoing, and in turn helping to confirm a persistent pattern that, if nothing else, is one of the most powerful folk myths of our time? The archetypal Men in Black report runs something like this. Shortly after a UFO sighting, the subject, he may be a witness, he may be an investigator on the case, receives a visit. Often it occurs so soon after the incident itself that no official report or media publication has taken place. In short, the visitors should not, by any normal channels, have gained access to the information they clearly possess: names, addresses, details of the incident, and about the people involved. The victim is always nearly alone at the time of the visit, usually at his home. His visitors, usually 3 in number, arrive in a large black car. In America, it is often a prestigious Cadillac, but seldom a recent model. At the same time, though old in date, it is likely to be new and immaculate in appearance and condition, inside and out, even having that unmistakable new car smell. If the subject notes the registration number and checks it, it is invariably found to be a non-existent number. The visitors themselves are almost always men, only very rarely is one a woman, and never more than one. In appearance, they conform pretty closely to the stereotyped image of a CIA or Secret Service man. They wear dark suits, dark hats, dark ties, dark shoes and socks, but white shirts. Witnesses very often remark on their clean, immaculate turnout, all the clothes looking as though just purchased. The visitors' faces are frequently described as vaguely foreign, most often Oriental. Slant eyes have been specified in many accounts. If not dark-skinned, the men are likely to be very heavily tanned. Sometimes there are bizarre touches. In the case of Dr. Hopkins, the man in black appeared to be wearing bright lipstick. The men in black are generally unsmiling and expressionless. Their movement, stiff and awkward. Their general demeanor is formal, cold, sinister, even menacing. There is no warmth or friendliness shown, even if there is no outright hostility either. Witnesses often hint that they felt the visitors were not human at all. Some men in black proffer evidence of identity, indeed. They sometimes appear in U.S. Air Force or other uniforms. They may produce identity cards, but since most people would not know a genuine CIA or other Secret Service identity card if they saw one, this proves nothing. If they give their names and the witness subsequently checks them, they are invariably found to be false. The interview is sometimes an interrogation, sometimes simply a warning. Either way, the visitors, even though they are asking questions, are clearly very well informed, with access to restricted information. They speak with perfect, sometimes too perfect, intonation and phrasing, and their language is apt to be reminiscent of the conventional villains of crime films. Again, Mr. Stiff, I fear you are not being honest. Mr. Vetch, it would be unwise of you to mail that report, immediately suggesting the unctuous threatener, beloved of Hollywood writers. The visit almost invariably concludes with a warning not to tell anybody about the incident if the subject is a UFO recipient, or to abandon the investigations if he is an investigator. Violence is often threatened, and the men in black depart as suddenly as they came. Most well-informed UFO enthusiasts, if asked to describe a typical Men in Black visit, would give some such account as the foregoing. However, a comparative examination indicates that such perfect Men in Black visits seldom occur in practice. Study of 32 of the more detailed and reliable cases reveal that many details diverge from the archetypal story. There were no visitors at all in 4 cases, only telephone calls, and of the remainder, only 5 involved 3 men, 2 involved 4, 5 involved 2, while the rest were only one single visitor. Although the appearance and behavior of the visitors does seem generally to conform to the prototype, it ranges from the entirely natural to the totally bizarre. The car, despite the fact that in America it is by far the commonest means of transportation, is in fact mentioned in only 1/3 of the reports. As for the picturesque details, the Cadillac, the antiquated model, the immaculate condition, these are in practice very much the exception. Of 22 American reports, only 9 mention a car. Of these, only 3 were Cadillacs, and only 2 specified as black, and only 2 as out-of-date models. On the other hand, these archetypal details tend to be more conspicuous in less reliable cases, particularly those in which investigators, rather the UFO recipients, are involved. This will be relevant when we come to consider possible explanations for the Men in Black phenomenon. However, although the ideal Man in Black case is far from being universal in practice, it has value as a kind of composite picture, embodying all of the various features that have been reported. Perhaps the case that comes closest to the archetypal is that of Robert Richardson of Toledo, Ohio, who, in July 1967, informed the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization that he had collided with a UFO while driving at night. Coming around a bend, he had been confronted with a strange object blocking the road. Unable to halt in time, he had hit it, although not very hard. Immediately on impact, the UFO vanished. Police who accompanied Richardson to the scene could only find his own skid marks, but on a later visit, he found a small lump of metal which he thought might have come from the UFO. 3 days later, at 11 p.m., 2 men in their 20s appeared at Richardson's home and questioned him for about 10 minutes. They did not identify themselves, and Richardson, to his own later surprise, did not ask who they were. They were not unfriendly, gave no warnings, just asked questions. He noted that they left in a black 1953 Cadillac, that is, a 14-year-old model. The number, when checked, was found not yet to have been issued, proving that whoever his visitors were, they were undoubtedly imposters of some sort. A week later, Richardson received a second visit from 2 different men, who arrived in a current model Dodge. They wore black suits and were dark complexioned. Although one spoke perfect English, the second had an accent, and Richardson felt that there was something vaguely foreign about them. At first they seemed to be trying to persuade him that he had not, in fact, hit anything at all. But then they asked for the piece of metal. When he told them it had been passed to APRO for analysis, they threatened, "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you'd better get that metal back." The existence of the metal was known only to Richardson and his wife, and to 2 senior members of APRO. Seemingly, the only way the strangers could have learned of this existence would be by tapping either his or Apro's telephone. There was no clear connection between the two pairs of visitors, but what both had in common was access to information that was not freely and publicly available. And it may be this that is the key to the Man in Black mystery. Agents of the Dark. Rarely, if ever, do the threats of the mysterious Men in Black come to anything. So what is the purpose behind their visits? Hilary Evans considers this disconcerting phenomenon. Thanks, Hilary. In September of 1976, Dr. Hubert Hopkins, a 58-year-old doctor and hypnotist, was acting as consultant on an alleged UFO teleportation case in Maine. One evening, when his wife and children had gone out, leaving him alone, the telephone rang, and a man identifying himself as Vice President of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization asked if he might visit Dr. Hopkins to discuss the case. Dr. Hopkins agreed. At the time, it seemed a natural thing to do. He went to the back door to switch on the light so that his visitor could find his way from the parking lot, and saw the man climbing the porch steps. I saw no car, and even if he did have a car, he could not have possibly gotten to my house that quickly from any phone, he later commented in astonishment. At the time, Dr. Hopkins felt no particular surprise as he admitted his visitor. The man was dressed in a black suit with black hat, tie, and shoes, and a white shirt. I thought he looked like an undertaker. His clothes were immaculate, suit unwrinkled, trousers sharply creased. When he took off his hat, he revealed himself to be completely hairless, not only bald, but without eyebrows or eyelashes. His skin was dead white, his lips bright red. In the course of their conversation, he brushed his lips with his gray suede gloves, and the doctor was astonished to see that his lips were smeared and the gloves stained with lipstick. It was only afterward, however, that Dr. Hopkins reflected on the strangeness of his visitor's appearance and behavior. At the time, he sat discussing the case in a normal manner. When he had given his account, his visitor stated that his host had 2 coins in his pocket, which was indeed the case. He asked the doctor to put one of the coins in his hand. He did so. The stranger asked Dr. Hopkins to watch the coin, not himself. As he watched, the coin seemed to go out of focus, and then gradually vanished. Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again, the visitor told him. After talking a little while longer on UFO topics, Dr. Hopkins noticed that the visitor's speech was slowing down. The man rose unsteadily to his feet and said very slowly, "My energy is running low. Must go now. Goodbye." And he walked falteringly to the door and descended the outside steps uncertainly, one at a time. Dr. Hopkins saw a bright light shining in the driveway, bluish white and distinctly brighter than a normal car lamp. At the time, however, he assumed it must be the stranger's car, although he neither saw nor heard it. Later, when Dr. Hopkins' family had returned, they examined the driveway and found marks that could not have been made by a car, because they were in the center of the driveway, where the wheels could not have been. By next day, although the driveway had not been used in the meantime, the marks had vanished. Dr. Hopkins was very much shaken by his visit, particularly when he reflected on the extraordinary character of the stranger's conduct. Not surprisingly, he was so scared that he willingly complied with his visitor's instruction to erase the tapes of the hypnotic sessions he was conducting with regard to his current case, and to have nothing further to do with the case. Curious incidents continued to occur both in Dr. Hopkins' household and in that of his eldest son. He presumed that there was some link with the extraordinary visit, but he had never heard from the stranger again. As for the New Jersey UFO Research Organization, no such institution exists. Dr. Hopkins' account is probably the most detailed we have of a Man in Black visit, and confronts us with the problem at its most bizarre. First, we must ask ourselves if a trained and respected doctor would invent such a strange tale, and if so, with what conceivable motive. Alternatively, Could the entire episode have been a delusion, despite the tracks seen by other members of his family? Could the truth lie somewhere between reality and imagination? That is to say, could there have been a real visitor, albeit an impostor, making a false identity claim, visiting the doctor for some unknown reason of his own, and somehow acting as a trigger for the doctor to invent the whole set of weird features that to a third party might have had some quite natural explanation? What seems the least likely explanation is that the whole incident took place in the doctor's imagination. When his wife and children came home, they found him severely shaken, with the house lights blazing, seated at a table on which lay a gun. They confirmed the marks in the driveway and a series of disturbances on the telephone that seemed to commence immediately after the visit. So it would seem that some real event occurred, although its nature remains mystifyingly uncertain. The concrete nature of the phenomenon was accepted by the United States Air Force, who were concerned that persons passing themselves off as U.S. Air Force personnel should be visiting UFO witnesses. In February 1967, Colonel George P. Freeman, Pentagon spokesman for the Air Force's Project Blue Book, told UFO investigator John Keel, in the course of an interview, mysterious men dressed in Air Force uniforms or bearing impressive credentials from government agencies have been silencing UFO witnesses. We have checked a number of these cases, and these men are not connected with the Air Force in any way. We haven't been able to find out anything about these men. By posing as Air Force officers and government agents, they are committing a federal offense. We would sure like to catch one. Unfortunately, the trail is always too cold by the time we hear about these cases. But we're still trying. One question remains. Were the imposters referred to by Colonel Freeman and Dr. Hopkins' strange visitor similar in kind? UFO sightings, like sensational crimes, attract a number of mentally unstable persons who are quite capable of posing as authorized officials in order to gain access to the witnesses. It is likely that some supposed men in black are simply pseudo-investigators of this sort. One curious recurrent feature of the men in black reports is the ineptitude of the visitors. Time and again they are described as incompetent. If they are impersonating human beings, they don't do it very well. They arouse their victims' suspicion by improbable behavior, by the way they look or talk, by their ignorance as much as their knowledge. Of course, it could be that the only ones who are spotted as imposters are those who are not good at their job, and there may be many more men in black cases that we never learn about, simply because the visitors successfully convince their victims that there is nothing suspicious about the visit, or that they will do their best to keep quiet about it. A feature of a great many men in black visits is the instruction to the witness not to say anything about the visit, and to cease all activity concerning the case. Clearly we know these cases only because such instructions have been disobeyed. Curiously, however, no terrible retribution follows, although violence is frequently threatened if the witness does not comply with the instructions. Canadian UFO witness Carmen Cuneo in 1976 was told by a mysterious visitor to stop repeating his story and going further into the case, or he would be visited by 3 men in black. I said, "What's that supposed to mean?" "Well," he said, "I could make it hot for you. It might cost you certain injury." A year later, Mexican witness Carlos de los Santos was stopped on his way to a television interview by not one, but 2 large black limousines, and one of the occupants, dressed in a black suit and Scandinavian in appearance, told him, "Look, boy, if you value your life and your family's, don't talk any more about this sighting of yours." However, there is no reliable instance of such threats ever having been carried out, though a good many witnesses have defied their warnings. Indeed, sinister though the men in black may be, they are notable for the lack of violence associated with them. The worst that can be said of them is that they harass the witnesses with their untimely visits and telephone calls, or simply disturb them with their very presence, while for the victim it is just as well that the threats of violence are not followed through. This is for the investigator one of the most disconcerting aspects of the phenomenon. For violence, if it is resulted in physical action, would at least help to establish the reality of the phenomenon, for it remains a fact that most of the evidence is purely hearsay in character, and not often in the highest quality. Cases as well attest as those of Mr. Richardson and Dr. Hopkins are unfortunately in the minority. There is a dismaying lack of precision about too many of the reports. Popular American writer Brad Steiger alleged that hundreds of ufologists, contactees, and chance recipients of UFOs claim to have been visited by ominous strangers, usually 3, dressed in black, but he cites only a few anecdotal instances. Similarly, John Keel, an expert on unexplained phenomena, claimed on a number of occasions he actually saw the Phantom Cadillacs as advertised, complete with sinister-looking Oriental passengers in black suits. But for a trained reporter, he shows a curious reluctance to pursue these sightings, or to give us chapter and verse in such an important matter. Such loose assertions are valueless as evidence. All they do is contribute to the myth. And so we come back once again to the Men in Black myth, and the possibility that there is nothing more to the phenomenon than the myth itself. Can we not write off the whole business as delusion? The creation of imaginative folk whose personal obsessions take on this particular shape because it reflects one or other of the prevalent cultural preoccupations of our time. At one extreme, we find contactee Woodrow Derenberger, insisting that the 2 men dressed entirely in black who tried to silence him were emissaries of the Mafia. At the other, theorist David Tansley suggests that they are psychic entities, representatives of the dark forces, seeking to prevent the spread of true knowledge. More matter-of-factly, Dominique Lechussy, one of Albert Bender's friends, held that they emanated from some unknown civilization, possibly underground, in a remote area of Earth, the Amazon, the Gobi Desert, or the Himalayas. But there is one feature that is common to virtually all Men in Black reports, that any theory must account for, and that perhaps contains the key to the problem. This is the possession by the Men in Black of information that they should not have been able to come by. Information that was restricted, not released to the press, known perhaps to a few investigators and officials, but not to the public, and sometimes not even to them. The one person who does have that knowledge is the person visited. In other words, the Men in Black and their victim share knowledge that perhaps nobody else possesses. Add to this fact that in almost every case, the Men in Black appear to the witness when he or she is alone. In Dr. Hopkins' case, for example, the visitor took care to call when the wife and children were away from home, and established this fact by telephone beforehand. The implication has to be that some kind of paranormal link connects the Men in Black and the persons they visit. To this must be added other features of the phenomenon that are not easily reconciled with everyday reality. These notorious black cars, for instance. Where are they when they are not visiting the witnesses? Where are they garaged, serviced? Do they ever get involved in breakdowns or accidents? Can it be that they materialize from some other plane of existence when they are needed? These are only a few of the questions raised by the Men in Black phenomenon. What complicates the matter is that Men in Black cases lie along a continuous spectrum ranging from the easily believable to the totally incredible. At one extreme are visits during which nothing really bizarre occurs, the only anomalous feature being perhaps that the visitor makes a false identity claim or has unaccountable access to private information.
But at the other extreme are cases in which the only explanation would be that the witness has succumbed to paranoia. In The Truth About the Men in Black, UFO investigator Ramona Clark tells of an unnamed investigator who was confronted by 3 men in black on July 3, 1969. On the window of the car in which they were riding was a symbol connected with them and their visitations. The symbol had a profound psychological impact on this man. I have never encountered such absolute fear in a human being. That first meeting was followed by continual harassment. There were mysterious telephone calls. The man's house was searched. He began to hear voices and see strange shapes. Black Cadillacs roamed the street in front of his house and followed him everywhere he went. Once he and his family were almost forced into an accident by an oncoming Cadillac. Nightmares concerning men in black plagued his sleep. It became impossible for him to rest. His work suffered, and he was scared of losing his job. Was it all in his mind? One is tempted to think so, but a friend confirmed that, while they talked, there was a strange-looking man walking back and forth in front of the house. The man was tall, seemed about 55 years old, and was dressed entirely in black. The Odd Couple. On September 24th, 1976, only a few days after Dr. Hopkins' terrifying visit from the Men in Black, his daughter-in-law, Maureen, received a telephone call from a man who claimed to know her husband, John, and asked if he and a companion could come and visit them. John met the men at a local fast food restaurant and brought him home with his companion, a woman. Both appeared to be in their mid-30s. They wore curiously old-fashioned clothes. The woman looked particularly odd. Her breasts were set very low, and when she stood up, it seemed that there was something wrong with the way her legs joined onto her hips. Both strangers walked very short steps, leaning forward, as though frightened of falling. Or maybe they just had a broken toe and they couldn't really walk that good. They accepted Coca-Colas, but did not so much as taste them. The strangers sat awkwardly together on a sofa, while the man asked a number of detailed personal questions. Did John and Maureen watch television much? What did they read? And what did they talk about? All the while the man was pawing and fondling his female companion, asking John if this was all right, and whether he was doing it correctly. It's getting a little awkward. John left the room for a moment, and the man tried to persuade Maureen to sit next to him on the couch. He also asked her how she was made, and whether she had any nude photographs of herself. Shortly afterward, the woman stood up and announced that she wanted him to leave. The man also stood, but made no move to go. He was between the woman and the door, and it seemed that the only way she could get to the door was by walking in a straight line, directly through him. Finally, the woman turned to John and asked, "Please move him. I can't move him myself." And then suddenly the man left, followed by the woman, both walking in straight lines. They did not even say goodbye. And that's about all the crazy Men in Black stories we have this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless you.